I never expected my quiet weekend getaway to turn into the most horrifying experience of my life. It all started when I decided to take a solo trip to unwind and escape the hustle and bustle of the city. The destination was a small, sleepy town that boasted tranquility and scenic views. I booked a room in an old, seemingly charming motel on the outskirts of town, lured by the promise of solitude and a picturesque setting. As I drove up to the motel, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over me. The building looked far more decrepit than the photos had shown. Faded paint peeled off the walls, and the sign flickered ominously in the growing twilight. The surrounding area was eerily quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. I checked in at the reception, where an elderly man with a weathered face and piercing eyes handed me a rusty key. He didn't say much, only that my room was at the end of the hall on the second floor. As I made my way up the creaky stairs and down the dimly lit corridor, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. My room was small and sparsely furnished. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling, and the bedspread looked like it hadn't been changed in years. I shuddered but told myself that it was just for one night. After all, I was here for the peace and quiet. I set my suitcase down and tried to settle in, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. It started with the noises. At first, I thought it was just the old building settling, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct. I heard faint whispers, almost like a conversation just beyond the walls. I pressed my ear against the wall but couldn't make out any words. It was just a low, murmuring noise that set my nerves on edge. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The night air was cool and crisp, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I glanced around, but the parking lot and surrounding woods were empty. When I returned to my room, the whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt even more disturbing. As I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, the noises started again. This time, they were accompanied by a soft tapping on the window. My heart raced as I slowly turned my head toward the sound. The window was slightly ajar, and I could see a shadowy figure standing just outside. I jumped out of bed and rushed to close the window, my hands shaking. The figure disappeared into the darkness as soon as I approached. I locked the window and drew the curtains, but the sense of being watched lingered. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains made me jump. I felt trapped in a nightmare, my fear growing with each passing minute. Around midnight, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. I could hear them clearly now, voices speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk, but there was no answer. Panic set in as I realized how isolated I was. The nearest town was miles away, and my only contact with the outside world was an old, unreliable landline. I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I couldn't spend the night cowering in fear. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a rusted iron lamp, and ventured into the hallway. The corridor was even darker than before, the lights flickering ominously. I followed the whispers, which seemed to be coming from the room directly below mine. As I approached the door, the voices stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, and raised my hand to knock. Before I could, the door creaked open on its own. The room was pitch black, and a foul odor wafted out, making me gag. I hesitated, but my curiosity and fear propelled me forward. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the outline of a figure sitting in the corner. It was an old woman, her hair matted and her eyes wild. She stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, she spoke in a voice that was both guttural and haunting. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her tone accusatory. I stammered, trying to explain that I was just a guest, that I didn't mean to intrude, but she cut me off with a chilling laugh. "You should never have come here. This place is cursed. Everyone who stays here is marked." I backed away, my mind racing. The stories I had read about haunted motels and cursed locations flashed through my mind. I had always dismissed them as fiction, but now, standing in that dark, oppressive room, I couldn't deny the terror I felt. The old woman stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, She pointed a bony finger at me and whispered, "Leave now, or you will suffer the same fate as the others." I didn't need any more convincing. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in my room. I grabbed my suitcase and fled the motel, my heart pounding in my ears. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the old woman standing in the parking lot, watching me with those piercing eyes. I never looked back. The next morning, I reported the incident to the local authorities, but they found nothing unusual. The motel was abandoned, they said, and had been for years. No one had checked in or out in a long time. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. All I know is that I will never forget the terror I felt, the whispers in the dark, and the old woman with the haunting eyes. The experience left me shaken, a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, and some stories are too horrifying to forget. In the heart of the Colorado Rockies, nestled among the snow-capped peaks and dense forests, stands the Overlook Hotel, a sprawling, majestic establishment steeped in opulence and grandeur. But beneath its luxurious facade lies a malevolent presence, waiting to ensnare its next victims. Stephen King's The Shining tells the harrowing tale of the Torrance family and their descent into madness, orchestrated by the supernatural forces within the Overlook. Join me as I recount this chilling story, filled with suspense, terror, and psychological twists. My name is Jack Torrance, and my life took a dark turn when I accepted the job as the winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. I thought it was a fresh start, a chance to escape my past mistakes and provide for my wife, Wendy, and our son, Danny. Little did I know that this decision would lead us into a nightmare from which there was no escape: the arrival. When we first arrived at the Overlook, the hotel seemed like a dream come true. It was vast, elegant, and steeped in history. The manager, Mr. Ullman, gave us a tour, showing us the luxurious ballroom, the grand dining room, and the sprawling grounds. He also introduced us to Dick Halloran, the head chef, who seemed to take a particular interest in Danny. Danny was a special child, gifted with an extraordinary ability he called the Shining. He could see things others couldn't, glimpses of the past and future, and he could communicate telepathically. Halloran recognized this gift, and he warned Danny to be cautious. He sensed the hotel's malevolent spirit, especially in room 237. Settling in. As the snow began to fall and the last of the staff left, we settled into our routine. I worked on my play, Wendy took care of the hotel, and Danny explored the endless corridors. The isolation was intense, but we were determined to make the best of it. However, strange things began to happen. Danny started having terrifying visions, blood-soaked hallways, ghostly figures, and a sense of impending doom. He was particularly haunted by the specter of two young girls, dressed in blue, who beckoned him to come play with them forever. I too began to feel the hotel's influence. At first it was subtle, a sense of unease, whispers in the night, fleeting shadows, but soon I was experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams. I saw myself, wielding a mallet, chasing Wendy and Danny through the hotel. I could feel the hotel's grip tightening around my mind, warping my thoughts and amplifying my darkest impulses. The hauntings intensify. One day, Danny ventured into room 237, despite Halloran's warning. He emerged terrified, with bruises on his neck. Wendy blamed me, believing I had hurt our son in a fit of rage. I denied it, but the seeds of distrust were sown. As the days passed, the hauntings intensified. I started seeing ghostly figures, former guests and staff who had met tragic ends in the hotel. There was the mysterious bartender, Lloyd, who served me drinks even though the bar was supposed to be empty. He seemed to know my deepest fears and desires, and he encouraged my growing paranoia. The most unsettling apparition was that of a former caretaker, Delbert Grady. He told me about his own descent into madness, how he had killed his wife and twin daughters. He insisted that I had to correct my family, just as he had done. The hotel's malevolent spirit was manipulating me, feeding my anger and desperation. The breaking point. Wendy and Danny sensed the danger too. Wendy found my manuscript, expecting to see the fruits of my labor, but instead she discovered page after page filled with the same sentence. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. It was a clear sign that I was losing my grip on reality. In a desperate bid to protect Danny, Wendy suggested leaving the hotel, but the snow had blocked all exits, trapping us inside. The hotel's influence grew stronger, and I found myself in the grip of a rage I couldn't control. I attacked Wendy, but she fought back, managing to lock me in the pantry. The final descent. Trapped and furious, I was visited again by Grady, who freed me from the pantry. I knew what I had to do. I had to correct my family just as he had done. Armed with a mallet, I hunted them through the hotel. Wendy managed to hide Danny in the snow-covered maze outside the hotel while she tried to fend me off. The hotel's ghosts were everywhere, urging me on, filling my mind with visions of violence and bloodshed. Meanwhile, Danny used his shining to reach out to Halloran, who was in Florida. Sensing the urgency, Halloran made his way back to the Overlook. He arrived just in time, but I attacked him too, leaving him gravely injured. The climactic chase, the final chase through the snow-covered maze, was a nightmare. I was driven by the hotel's dark power, my mind consumed by madness. But Danny was clever. He retraced his steps, confusing me and leading me deeper into the labyrinth. I lost sight of him, the cold sapping my strength, my sanity slipping away. Danny and Wendy managed to escape on Halloran's snowmobile. The hotel, furious at losing its victims, turned its wrath on me. The boiler, which I had neglected in my madness, exploded, consuming the Overlook in flames. I was trapped inside, the hotel's malevolent spirit ensuring that I would never leave. Aftermath. The Overlook Hotel was destroyed, but the scars it left on Wendy and Danny would never fully heal. They found refuge with Halloran, who helped them begin the long process of recovery. The malevolent spirit of the hotel was gone, but its legacy of terror would linger in their memories forever. The Forgotten Room. A motel nightmare. I often travel for work, and motels have become my second home. Most of the time, they're mundane, forgettable places. But one night, during a trip to a small town in the middle of nowhere, I encountered something I wish I could forget. The day had been long, and I was exhausted. As I pulled into the parking lot of the Sunset Motel, I felt a wave of relief. It was a nondescript, one-story building with a neon sign that flickered sporadically. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked and made my way to the front desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a forced smile and tired eyes, handed me a key with a wooden tag that read, Room 11. She warned me about the unreliable hot water and the lack of Wi-Fi, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted a few hours of sleep before continuing my journey. The room was at the far end of the building, and as I walked past the other doors, I noticed how deserted the place seemed. It was unusually quiet, save for the distant hum of cicadas. I reached room 11 and inserted the key. The door creaked open, revealing a small, musty room with outdated decor. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, but I attributed it to the lack of ventilation. I tossed my bag onto the bed and decided to take a quick shower. The bathroom was cramped and grimy, with a flickering light bulb casting eerie shadows on the stained tiles. As I turned on the faucet, the pipes groaned, and a trickle of lukewarm water sputtered out. I sighed and made do, quickly rinsing off the day's grime. Back in the main room, I lay down on the bed and tried to relax. But as I stared at the ceiling, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to come from the wall behind the headboard. I sat up, listening intently, but the noise stopped. Shaking my head, I lay back down, convincing myself it was just the old building settling. I drifted off to sleep, but my rest was soon interrupted by a loud bang. I jolted awake, my heart pounding. The room was pitch dark, and for a moment I thought it had been a dream. Then I heard it again, a loud, deliberate knock on the wall. I turned on the bedside lamp and stared at the wall, my mind racing. The knocking continued, each thud more insistent than the last. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall, trying to discern the source. To my surprise, I heard a muffled voice, almost a whisper. "Help me, please." My blood ran cold. I stepped back, my pulse quickening. I looked around the room, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. The knocking persisted, and the voice grew louder, more desperate. "Help me! I'm trapped!" Summoning my courage, I left my room and went to the front desk. The receptionist looked up, her face pale and drawn. Before I could speak, she shook her head. "Room 11, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have warned you." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath and began to tell me the story. Years ago, a young woman named Emily had checked into room 11. She was on the run from an abusive relationship, seeking refuge in the quiet town. One night, she simply vanished. The police searched the room and the surrounding area but found no trace of her. The only clue was a series of strange knocks and muffled cries that guests reported hearing ever since. The motel had tried to cover it up, but the legend persisted. Room 11 was known among the staff as the Forgotten Room, a place where Emily's spirit lingered, trapped, and tormented. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why did you put me in there?" She looked down, shamefaced. "We don't have many guests, and we need the money." I thought, maybe it was just stories. I didn't know what to say. My mind was reeling, trying to process the information. The receptionist handed me a different key. "Take room 5, she said. "It's far from room 11. You should be safe there." I took the key and hurried back to gather my things. As I packed, the knocking grew louder, more frantic. I tried to ignore it, but the desperation in the voice was palpable. "Please, don't leave me." I froze, my heart aching for the lost soul. I wanted to help, but I was just an ordinary person, helpless against the supernatural. I grabbed my bag and fled the room, slamming the door behind me. I could still hear the knocking as I hurried down the corridor. Room 5 was quiet and uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and fear. I barely slept, my mind haunted by the cries for help. The next morning I checked out at first light, eager to put the nightmare behind me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw room 11. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the window, watching me leave. My heart ached for Emily, but I knew there was nothing more I could do. The experience left a lasting scar on my psyche. To this day, I can't stay in motels without feeling a pang of anxiety. The memory of that night, the desperate pleas and relentless knocking, will stay with me forever. Some places are cursed, and some souls are too tormented to find peace. The Sunset Motel and its Forgotten Room are a stark reminder that some horrors are all too real. Join us next time as we delve into more tales of terror and suspense, exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche and the supernatural forces that seek to exploit our deepest fears. Until then, remember to keep the lights on and never venture into the shadows alone.